Hi everyone, welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all once again. So we've been having a range of speeches already today. So we've talked about motivation, we've talked about teams, we've talked about lean architecture, and now it's time for another keynote speech. Let me introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Madu Ratnayake. So Madu needs no introduction to the community over here in Sri Lanka. And he's a person that most of us over here in Sri Lanka looked up to when we joined the industry, as well as when we worked up the ranks. He's an accomplished C-suite board executive leader with experience in envisioning digital strategy, cybersecurity, business transformation, and building global high-performing teams to deliver growth in tech and financial services companies. He's the co-founder of Skybus, and is a member of the board of directors at Hatton National Bank, Sri Lanka. He's the former chief information officer at Virtusa and board member at multiple other organizations. So without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Madu Ratnayake for his keynote speech, Agile C-Suite, Embracing Agile to Lead the Future. Madu, over to you.
Thank you, Ramesh. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be part of the Regional Scrum gathering. I hope you're having a wonderful time so far. What I want to do today is just to take you through some thoughts around how to design an organization embracing Agile, right? And what you have Agile at different levels of an organization, but how do you really take it across the organization? So that's the idea that I want to share with you. I'll give you some personal experience and some of the things what's out there from in the industry, and maybe we can discuss a little bit towards the end. So when you think about designing organization for the future, it's important to understand the context, look back in the history, and look forward to the future to understand how the context is changing. Right? If you can see in this slide here that every turn or every wave of change is driven by some technology underneath it, right? If you think about the first wave of starting in 1970s, driven by water power, then second wave is driven by steam and electricity and so forth, and the changes that we are going through today, as you can see, which is exponentially growing, is driven by technology, right? Underneath the change that we witness in today's context, especially if you think about the last 50 years and maybe thinking about the next 25 years, it's driven by technology. And underneath the technology, there is an interesting law that works, right? I'm sure all of you are in technology have heard about this, what's called the Moore's law, right? Moore's law simply says that every 18 to 24 months, what you can put in a chip, a number of transistors you can put in a chip doubles, right? And so does the computing power. And like clockwork, the last 50 years, Moore's law has been happening, right? Since 1970s, when Moore's laws were introduced, every 18 to 24 months, the computing power has increased, right? And this has been the catalyst for the exponential growth that we see today, right? For the last half a century, it's been happening. If you think about some of the technologies that we think about as science fiction, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, like self-driving cars, computing beating Go champions, drones, computer chess champions. These are things that today are possible, but probably about science fiction maybe 5-10 years ago, right? And as you enter this exponential growth curve, especially as the curve turns the exponent, it's very difficult to comprehend the rate of change, right? If you're doubling something every 18 to 24 months, it comes to a point that it's becoming very, very hard to comprehend, right? Just to understand that how fast things are changing, let me share with you an story, right? And this is about the game of chess. This helps us understand why we are seeing some of these crazy technologies coming out now, and why it is real, right? Even though Moore's law has been going on for 50 years, now is the time that you are seeing some of these changes, right? So this story is about the inventor of the game of chess. He came up with the game, and he wanted to really show what he has came up with, and this happened in India. So he took his game and went to the Emperor of India and shared, hey, here's a game of chess. Here's how it works. It's a game of strategy. And the Emperor was so impressed and said, you can name your price, whatever you want. I will give that to you, right? He said, hey, I'm a humble person. I really don't need a lot of things. Just give me some rice to feed my family. Right? And just to figure out how much rice you can give me, just put, chessboard is 64 squares, right? You say, put one grain of rice in the first square. And when you go to the next square, you double it, put 2, and then the third square you put 4, and so forth, right? And so just fill 64 squares, and that would be enough for me. Right? Just like the Moore's law, it's doubling every turn, right? So Emperor thought 64 squares. This is not a lot of rice he's asking. He said, it's fair ask. We'll give that to you. And he ordered his treasury to go and give that to him, right? And then time went by, and Emperor was looking at, it has this prize being given to the inventor, and his treasury comes back and says, the amount of rice that you have to give if you fill it the entire chessboard, doubling at each time, is a rice pile as big as the Mount Everest, right? So it's a massive amount of rice. So and what happens is, when you, up until about the half of the chessboard, first 32 squares is not a lot of rice, right? You just double, it keeps doubling. and maybe one football field or two football field worth of rice will come to about half the chessboard. After that, it becomes exponential. That's where it's very difficult for you to comprehend, right? It's about the second half is where we are really seeing that exponential working, right? It turns out that we are just entering the second half of chessboard when it comes to technology, right? That's why we start seeing some of these crazy technology coming out, because we're building on top of what is already there, right? So this is driving this exponential growth, right? And so if you think about, we are just entering the second half, we really haven't seen anything yet, right? We are just scratching the surface. We are going to see a lot more innovation, right? So, but to make this work, we have to design organizations to be able to keep up with that kind of speed, right? That systematically adapt to this rate of change. You really have to be agile at the core, right? Because otherwise you won't be able to keep up with the exponential growth that happens around you. So if you think about speed is now the new currency of business, right? If you are operating at this exponential pace of growth in our context, your business has to also build speed into its operation, right? So how do you and obviously friction is the enemy of speed, so you have to build organizations that are designed for speed and eliminate friction in that process, right? So how do you really build organizations for speed, right? And that's where I think a lot of thoughts and discussions and experiments going on, and how do we embrace practices of agile at the core of a business. So that's why we think about agile. And if you look at how do you design any business, right? Not just for speed. What are the parts of any business, right? So there are a few areas, right? When you're designing a business, when you're thinking about a business, so vision, strategy, structure, execution, culture, leadership, and talent. These are some of the building blocks of building an organization, right? There's a great book called What Really Works, the 4+2 formula. That's where this is coming from. I'll refer that at the end for you. And so if you think about vision and strategy, is really the map where you're trying to go, and structure, execution, culture, talent, and leadership is really about kind of the vehicle, right? And we've seen, Agile largely today, we used to speed up the execution, right? How do you build products faster? How do you build software faster? And we use agile principles in the execution pillar, right? And if you're really thinking about building agile into the core of the organization, it's really about thinking, how do you make the entire organization agile? How do you drive vision in an agile way? How do you drive strategy in an agile way? How do you build structures to meet agile way of execution? So what we want to explore in the next maybe a few minutes is really about how do you build agile into the core of your organization, right? So I want to talk about 6 areas. One is the agile C-suite, or how do you build agile leadership teams. Then we want to discuss about how do you balance your organization. I'll talk about agile balance points in an organization. Then how do you move from being a hierarchical organization and to what I like to call a hierarchy, or work like a network. And then how do you empower these kind of organizations? Direction with empowerment. And how do you execute? We know how to execute a project using Scrum, but how do you execute organization transformation using Agile? And finally, about how you adopt design thinking in doing that, right? Given the kind of problems we are solving when we talk about Agile transformation. Right? So first one is Agile leadership in the C-suite. There's an article in HBR called the Agile C-suite. This talked about this Agile manifesto and the balance points, right? So I'm going to really use that, which I found very interesting and quite relevant in really designing a leadership team to focus on agile, right? So when you talk about leadership, we're talking about CEOs, CFOs, CEO, the CXO, C-suite in the company. What can they do to embrace agile for the company, right? So there are four agile manifesto principles they talk about, right? The first one is individuals and interaction, not processes and tools, right? How do you set a very clear ambition for the organization, what to drive, and set up guardrails to execute that, right? Instead of really giving how to the teams to do, you let the teams figure out how to do, right? And leadership is about setting that the direction and ambition, and in releasing the power of the team to be able to execute that, right? Second one is customer engagement and not rigid contracts, right? How do you we encourage team to seek feedback from the customers and continuously evolve and rapidly change to that feedback, adapt that feedback, and not try to define your customer experience in a rigid contracts, right? It's easier said than done. It's very similar philosophies, principles that you adapt in a software project, right? And that works, right? If you really work and focus on the customer engagement and not throw in the contract at people, you will create better engagement. You will create faster ability for you to relate to the customer, right? And drive their feedback. And you need to do that in the context of some guardrails, right? By the way, embracing agile doesn't mean that you are throwing away all your other practices, but it's building on those practices and moving your organization to a balance point with agile, right? The third one is working solution, not excessive documentation. Very similar to normal agile principles. It makes a lot of common sense. You're building solutions, you are showcasing those solutions, and that helps you to innovate faster and build things faster, right? You're more than happy to share with your work in progress products. You're more than happy to try out processes which are in progress, in design, and as opposed to trying to document those things, right? And then flexibility and not concrete plans, right? This is really about driving in a more sprint-based way, thinking about the next cycle always, and then building that execution plan around it. So these are the four agile manifesto for a C-suite, and what we expect is a CEO to embrace this and be the champion in the organization and parlay that down the organization. So this is kind of the framework of mindset that leaders embrace when you are taking an agile approach to designing the organization for speed, right? So it's about really, once you embrace that mindset, it's about figuring out where you want to get to in your organization when it comes to agile, right? So there are several balance points that we need to reach at, right? How do you go from in two extremes? If you think about the purpose and value, we talk about those 4+2 areas, right? How do you move to a more agile in each of these areas? So if you think about purpose and value, and one extreme you have soulless targets, you're just driven behind numbers. Another extreme, you have very vague, fickle goals. And an agile organization will come to the point where you are sharing some inspiring shared ambition, right? That's how you define an agile-based purpose and values. If we talk about strategy, how do you build an adaptive roadmaps, right? As opposed to detailed plans and giving commands to people, or uncoordinated, undisciplined plans that have no plan at all, right? So that's the second balance point in your strategy. How do you bring your organization from wherever you are to a more agile, adaptive roadmap based approach, right? And the third one is about leadership and culture, right? You move from being a complete neglect at one extreme, fully authoritarian at the other extreme, to a more culture of learning and engagement, right? Your leadership style have to change towards that if you want to embrace agile, right? Then the structure and accountability, go from complete bureaucracy to other extreme anarchy. And how do you really get to a more agile point, which is called the bounded autonomy? You're giving enough autonomy, but with guardrails, so you are moving in the right direction. Right? And when you come to talent, how do you move from very impractical end of impractical inventors, very chaotic or very static, where disengaged conformist, to a agile point, which is more collaborative experts, right? How do you bring your talent focus into that? This is where some of the things that I talked about later, like moving from hierarchy to hierarchy kind of things, will help us get there, right? So these are the balance points, and the rest of the slide I'll talk about how you can get there. How do you really move an organization to this balance point, right? And then finally, when you come to business processes, how do you move from very erratic innovations to from one end inflexible operation on the other end, and more balanced and harmonized activities in an agile way, right? So these are some of the agile balance point, and there are a couple of others, but I thought these are the key ones that drives the design of a agile organization. So that's the second point, right? So once you design the agile leadership, you embrace that mindset, then you come and design, okay, where do you want to get the organization to be able to build for speed. And then the third one is what I like to call move from hierarchy to hierarchy, right? Most traditional organizations are built like a hierarchy, right? We set up organization structures. We put people into boxes, and organizations work in a hierarchy, right? Your communication goes through the hierarchy, up and down, and that generally slows things down, right? If you want to have to talk to the next person, you have to go through your manager to the next person. It becomes generally difficult, and we all know how hierarchy works, and I'm sure you have experience in some places. And an agile organization, if you want to embrace speed, you have to work more like a network, right? As opposed to hierarchy. And what are the differences? How do you really know what is the difference between the two, right? In a hierarchy, you are a position in the network, or position in the hierarchy, right? Whereas in a network, you are a node, right? You're connected to multiple ways. Information goes everywhere. In a hierarchy, information only go up and down, right? In a network, information go every direction. Everyone has a voice. And power in a hierarchy comes from the position in your hierarchy. The higher you go, the more position, more power that you have in the organization, right? Whereas authority in a network comes from value you create, right? If you're relevant to more people, you're more powerful in a network, right? And that comes from being creating value, right? So the hierarchy is designed to just get the work done. Network is also designed to get the work done, right? And power, and here power is strength in a hierarchy. In a network, your power comes from being vulnerable, right? So how do you move from we know very clearly into really move fast, you need a more like a network, right? So how do you do that? There is kind of three things you need to worry about. One is your mindset, second your tool set, and then practices, right? If you think about the mindset, to operate in a hierarchy, you have to think about relationships, right? First mindset that you have to embrace. You work in a company that you're focusing on building relationship, and how do you build relationships is really through helping others, and really looking at others' needs, and going the extra mile to be able to help, right? Before go and asking in a hierarchy, you try to get something done, you want to go to other person and ask them to help you. And a network, you figure out how you help the other person, and that's a relationship mindset. The second is generosity, right? How do you help in that context? Your focus is not really about getting things, but more about giving things, right? And also embracing a growth mindset. That means that you think that things can be always things can be done. There is a way of doing it that you just don't know yet, and if you work hard enough, if you embrace that, you can actually do it and learn it, and then you go after it, right? So these are some of the mindsets that you need to embrace to work like a network. There was a great concept called working out loud. I'll give you a reference at the end that helps you work like a hierarchy or work like a hierarchy, right? So that's the first thing. Then you come the tool sets, right? Things like social platforms, right? Like Facebook for work or workplaces, Yammer, and a whole bunch of other technologies that chat and Slack and things like that helps you communicate more freely and more across the organization. So if you want to drive speed, you need to embrace tools and platforms like that helps you get there, right? And then when you come to practices, it's things like working out loud that embraces the culture of network, right? If you think about why networks are important, is how the organization work today, right? It's more project based or more it's like a film industry, right? If you think about film industry, people to make a movie, people come together, directors and whole organization come together, actors and producers, everybody comes together and produce that movie. They intense that during that period, and once the movie is done, they disperse and go and do something else, right? They make the next movie with next set of people. And organization designed for speed are like that as well, right? It's not about fixed hierarchy, it's about initiatives and models that you embrace that same way of working in a movie set, and you adopt that in your organization, right? So how do you create the framework or guardrails to do that? And the next concept that I want to share with you is, and some of you may have heard about, is OKR, right? It's called the Objective Key Results. This was originated in Intel. Andy Grove came up with the concept, and John Doerr kind of popularized this with his book called Measure What Matters. And it's a very simple concept at heart, and this is right now being embraced by a lot of the technology companies. Google had championed this, Microsoft has embraced that, and they have even introduced that into Microsoft Office if you're using that now, and many other tech companies, right? At the core of it is very simple. You have objectives and key results, right? Objective talks about what you're trying to accomplish, very simply stating where you want to go, right? And then key results showcasing how you will measure when you get there, right? So you have the guardrails, or you know where it gets to, and then leaving the team to figure out how to get there, right? So how to get there you can have many paths to a point, right? So you can go from A to B via C, or you can go A to B via D, E, and a number of other paths, right? So if when you embrace OKR, that's how you design or define the work to get done, and then leave the teams to execute that. You can see how empowering that is as a practice, as opposed to traditional goal setting, which are largely activity driven, and you agree on some activities and you check whether you've done it at the end. Here you agree on a goal and set of metrics to which when you achieve that, and you look at how you achieve it. And a couple of examples here. You are trying to, so your objective is to skyrocket your growth, and consistent scaling and is what you're trying to achieve, right? This is probably a SaaS company kind of goal, and you're defining key results, right? Key result one could be month-on-month revenue growth to be about 19%, very crisp and clear, right? 100% customer renewal rate, key operating profit margin about 15%. So there is no ambiguity about the results, right? When you achieve this result, you know exactly where you are. At the same time, you are giving a broader objective where people can figure out how to get there, right? So this is a very powerful concept. I've embraced this in a number of organizations. It takes a while for people to understand it, and when very agile that you embrace in number of cycles. You go 2 or 3 cycles, so it probably takes about 6 to 9 months to really make it work. And what it also does is creates inspiration for people. You know where we are going. At the same time, it's create visibility, right? It's also, you say at the organization level, what are the OKRs, and you break that down to different teams, and you see how your OKRs leads up to the company's OKR, right? And if you embrace a tool for this, you can also see how the company is moving. Whenever you do something, achieve your key result, how it links to the rest of the organization, right? So setting goals with empowerment is another very key tenet of speed. If you want to achieve speed, you have to leave people the way of execution, and you have to bring smart enough people who can get it done in the most optimum way, and you use OKRs to do that. So that's another very powerful tool that you use for this, right? And the third, the next principle or driver that I want to talk about is how you design your organization or any initiatives of your organization around your stakeholders, right? In a typical organization, you have your sales, your operations, your finance, your HR, your customer service, and you may have a number of other departments. And you are organized around your departmental silos, right? If you look at finance, CFO will worry about finance, your HR head will worry about HR, your sales head will worry about sales. Now, if you think about from the perspective of your stakeholders, if you look at your customer has to work with sales, and they'll have to work with operations to get whatever they deliver. They'll have to work with finance to pay that. And then if something goes wrong, you have to work with your customer service, right? Similar to employees, they have to work across. And so organization is not designed around your stakeholders. Organization is designed around, in a traditional sense, around department and your core competence in those different areas, right? Not so much around the customer. But this is, obviously, you can see a number of lines going here and there. It's not very optimal for the stakeholders, right? If you're a customer in an organization highly departmentalized, you know the pain in that, right? You will be sending from pillar to post if you're not sort out an issue. Even buying something is not that easy from an organization like that, right? So how do you design for speed? What is there an alternative, right? There is a alternative. Certainly, it's about embracing a more end-to-end approach, right? So if you think about what you do in an organization from the perspective of your stakeholders, if you think about customer, some of your end-to-end processes would be order to cash, right? How do you look at from a customer order to all the way to a customer payment? Or customer has an issue, how do you look at the trouble to resolve journey, right? And if you look at employees, it's hire to retire. If you look at suppliers, procure to pay. So you look at from a more end-to-end journeys of your stakeholder, and you design your transformation around that, right? And this is a pattern that most now tech-savvy organization are embracing. They're designing organization. They'll still have your traditional departments, but on top of that, they have a director of order to cash, or somebody who look at the order to cash journey end to end, and then they bring teams from all the different departments, and that becomes a core driver. Your budgets are allocated to journeys, your teams are allocated to journeys, and you're focusing your organization around your customer and employee and supplier, right? And in those kind of setup, you drive through agile initiatives, right, which have very clear ownership, and it's stakeholder aligned because you are focusing around a key journey, right? And they respond to change and deliver these things in sprints, right? You might have your order to cash journey delivered in 10 different sprints, right? And you're building rapid feedback loop instead of highly try to predict unpredictable. You agile leaders build rapid feedback loop so you can drive these initiatives, and almost they become another layer of your organization, right? That's how you become more relevant and build speed on those journeys. So that's the next tenet. And the last focus is embracing design thinking for speed, right? If you think about organization, you solve set of problems, right? And you have many different types of problems. You have engineering problems like building a bridge. You use engineering thinking. And typically, once you build one bridge, you figure out how to build it, you can repeat that, right? Then you have business problems like taking market share. These are optimization problems, right? You take some optimization kind of thinking. Then you have research problems, right? Things like you come up with a hypothesis and you try to solve that hypothesis, and using some analytical thinking. So what kind of problems so that you solve with design thinking? These are problems called wicked problems, right? The term wicked problem came in 70s from town planners in the US, and they define wicked problems as problems you really don't know what you're trying to solve, right? And you also don't know the answer exactly till you find it, right? And once you solve it, it's very difficult to repeat, right? And building an organization is like solving a bigger problem, right? It's very much like that. You don't know where you're really trying to get to, and only when you get there, you got there. And designing one organization doesn't mean that you can design a next organization the same way. If you look at the town planning example, if you design, say, everybody try to emulate Silicon Valley, right? But it's very difficult to figure out how to build a Silicon Valley because it's a wicked problem, right? You can't, there's no formula, you can't repeat it. You have to use a design thinking kind of approach to do it. So how does designers solve problems? They solve the problem by simply in iterations, right? In agile way, you start, you build a hypothesis, and you design a bit, and then you build a bit, and then you try it out, and you get feedback, and you repeat that process, right? Design a build a bit, test a bit, and keep moving in that loop till you find a good enough solution, right? And once you come to a good enough solution, you say, okay, we've come there. And that's a design's approach of solving problems, and that's what we embrace if you want to design your organization for speed. So that's kind of the last pillar. So if I want to recap, if speed is the new currency of business, and you see the rate of change in the context and why it is important. And we talked about these 6 drivers, right? Building an agile leadership team, embracing the Agile manifesto at the CEO, CXO level in your Agile suite, setting the tone at the top. Secondly, moving and figuring out which balance point you want to move to from your strategy, from your structure, from your talent, from your leadership, and knowing where you want to get to. And then you move from a hierarchy to hierarchy, work more like a network as opposed to a hierarchy, and create speed in that process. And setting your goals and objectives using OKRs, providing direction with empowerment, and executing initiatives around your stakeholders, around your journeys as opposed to your departments, and building your organization around your external stakeholders. And finally, doing that using design thinking. I've seen this time and time again in many places, many organizations, and especially what I've been trying to build speed into the organization that I'm involved in. These things are the core principles and practices that helps you build a more faster organization that respond to the changing context. I hope that gives you some ideas about when you think about your own organization. But if you're interested in learning a little bit more, here are a few great references that you can look into. The John Doerr's book about what measure what matters really introduced the concept of OKR. It's a fantastic book. I would encourage everybody who's thinking about Agile to embrace OKR. It's a great investment. What Really Works is another great book if you're a CXO, if you're thinking about organizations and really trying to understand what is the core of an organization. How do you build the building blocks? It's a phenomenal book. Then Agile C-Suite is an article that came out in Harvard Business Review. You can Google it. You will find that the manifesto was introduced there. I think it's work in progress, but there's very interesting set of concepts. Tim Brown of IDEO, who who kind of popularized the concept of design thinking, which comes from actually the Stanford D School. The book called Change by Design is a phenomenal introduction to the whole concept of design thinking, building things like a designer. Then Working Out Loud by Joan Stepper introduced you to the working out loud concept. It's again very interesting concept to work like a network. If you say work like a network is important, how do you do it is here, right? It's a set of principles and practices. And the last one is Gray Hamel's recent book called Humanocracy, from a bureaucracy to humanocracy kind of a thing that he's coined this word, and really talk about how do you build organizations for people, right? So these are a few reference points I'd leave you with to take away if you're interested in exploring more in this topic. And it's a fascinating topic of everybody who's involved in building organization, which is I believe all of us are. Whether you are a node in the organization or you are the CEO, you can design whatever the area of organization that you are part of to be more agile, to be more faster, right? So with that, let me conclude my few thoughts, and Ramesh, back to you.
Thank you very much, Madhu. Thank you very much for that timely and thought-provoking keynote speech. I'm sure agile leadership these days during these trying times, I'm sure that actually is a very timely topic. The audience, if you all do have any questions for Madhu, please do use the chat, and I'll forward the questions to Madhu. In the meantime, Madhu, building on what I just said, working in these tough times where people are working from home, what do you think are the additional challenges that the C-suite might be facing in terms of adopting these agile ways of working at that level?
Yeah, I think when you talk about tough times, essentially you have constraints, you have more things change rapidly. It's similar things, right? I think what we talked about, it's about being responsive, right? It's about building feedback loops. It's about understanding, because as leaders, you don't have all the answers, right? And especially when the times are tough, you want to embrace more of your people in the organization and your stakeholders, your customers, your suppliers, your shareholders, right? So it's an important time to even do this even more, right? Especially if you're going through tough times, you have to be more responsive, and you have to be listening to more of your stakeholders. So that's, I think, one of the fundamental things, right? When you're going through a period of either high rate of change or difficult set of constraints, and you have to believe that you don't know the answers fully, all the answers, right? You have to listen, and as a country, we've gone through that, right? You have to listen, you have to understand what's going on, right? If you're completely blindsided by your own thoughts, and you can end up with a disaster, right? And that's why it's important you embrace more of agile mindset, agile approach of working, being more responsive, and trying out things, right, in more small iterations, as opposed to building grand designs, right?
Yeah. Madhu, so we've got some questions from Tusita, first of all. Organization OKRs being decomposed down to teams, will it again create a mini hierarchy? What is the best way to do it?
Yeah, great question, Tusita. I think it's you break down the teams doesn't necessarily mean hierarchy, right? The hierarchy, you have to decompose. Obviously, you can't have everybody in one team and try to do something, right? If you're in a manageable entities, it's about how you build the team. In a hierarchy, you have permanent teams. In a network, if you're working in a hierarchy, you build teams for that moment, right? For that initiative, that engagement. If you're driving a transformation in your customer experience, for example, you bring people from different backgrounds, different competencies, and put them into a team, and you set goals for those teams using OKRs, right? So OKRs helps you decompose and build it down to smaller teams, and then that doesn't necessarily means that you decompose only on your hierarchy. you have to decompose on your initiatives, right? Your organization is set of initiatives, how you respond to the. So that's the difference, right? You think about your organization as set of departments, or you think about your organization as set of initiatives that you keep executing, that keep changing, right? So that's a difference, right? From a hierarchy to journeys, that's a difference, right? Your own number of journeys for your customer, or your number of journeys to employees, number of journeys with your suppliers, and you design teams around those, and then use OKRs to design that goal as well as the outcome, right? I hope that explains that to you, Tusita. It's a good question.
Yeah. And Tusita, you can let us know on the chat. Madhu, I think we can take a couple of more questions. That means if you can flash another question. Yeah, so we have a question from Janesh. Can we use OKRs for testing teams? What are the OKRs we can use in Agile context for testing teams? Madhu?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can use for testing. Your goal would be something like achieve whatever the kind of quality that you're trying to achieve, or eliminate the defects what you're trying to do. So you define that way, and your key results could be number of defects you uncover, or any other metric that you're looking at, estimated defect densities, whatever. You have goals to measure. How do you achieve that? Then you leave the teams to figure out what paths to go, how to design the test scripts, how to figure out what are the ways to test the thing, right? So you say, here's the objective, here's what we want to achieve. We want to ensure the product defects are identified, or all the defects as much as possible. You have the goals when you know how to achieve, and you put a competent team who can figure out how to do it. What kind of testing methodology I'm going to use this time, what kind of tools that I'm going to use, that you leave to the team, right? And if you have the right kind of people, they'll come up with that, how to do that, and they'll learn through that experience, right? So that's how you probably can embrace, as opposed to here's the test plan, here's the test script, go execute. Then you're going to end up with getting what you define exactly in your test script, nothing more. But if you set the goal saying, I want to achieve group quality, and here's how how I achieved it, you might find people become very creative to achieve that.
Yeah. Madhu, so we've got a question from Dr. Madhu Fernando. So great insights, Madhu. Thanks. This is a long-term process to change the mindset of the individuals at the top, isn't it? Where do you start it to make it a guaranteed success?
Yeah, hi Madhu. Yeah, absolutely. It's a journey, and it's not easy. And if you don't have that mindset at the top, it's very difficult, right? It's you can't drive Agile in an organization at this level. Difficult to do bottom up, right? You have to have a leader who's aware. You have to have a leader who is understand the concept, who has embraced this, right? Otherwise, it becomes extremely difficult. But I think you see the context. If you think about the first kind of discussion we had in the first slide, the rate of change in context, that's why I kind of brought that up. And everybody understands speed is key, right? And if you want to be relevant in your business, and you have the competition who is moving faster than you have to figure out how to be fast, right? So it's a matter of time more leaders understand that, okay, my organization has to go faster if I want to be relevant in this new context. And how do I do that? And if you really think about, then these are some of the concept: design thinking, OKRs, Agile C-suite. I think naturally we'll get there. Most companies will get there, right? And I always look at technology companies as kind of the leading edge of transformation. A lot of stuff that technology companies do, like OKRs, for example, trickle down to other organizations over time, right? Because they are at the center of this change, right? Center of this transformation. So it's a great way to look at what software companies or technology companies do, and then embrace that in everywhere else, whether you are a bank, or whether you are a textile company, you are a retailer. You can look at, if you want to see what's coming, just look at tech companies around you, and that's what's coming, right? And and you embrace those practices. If you want to go faster than your competition, if you want to be responsive to your users, I think it will happen across the board and a lot more. But yeah, it's a journey, and people have to be aware, especially leadership.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, Madhu, thank you very much. I think it sure is a journey, and embracing the agile mindset, forming the agile leadership teams, and then embracing the agile mindset, bringing in design thinking practices, and bringing in all those good practices is actually a journey. I'm sure the audience learned a lot today from you. Thank you very much, Madhu. For everyone's information, Madhu is actually joining from abroad, and it's early in the morning for Madhu. Thank you very much on a Sunday morning joining with us. It's an honor to have you with us at RSG Sri Lanka 2022. And we hope to see you again sometime in the future when we do another conference.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and everyone, with that, we'll be going for a 5-minute break. After the break, we will have a workshop. So it will be in sessions, not on stage. Search for the session, the Integral Leadership and Agile Transformation. So it's a workshop done by Fadli Raziad. It will happen at 9:45 a.m. So we'll see you then.